You can lose the majority and still end up taking control anyway. That's the political storm building in Canada right now, and it's why people across the country are suddenly asking a very uncomfortable question. Did voters deny Mark Carney's Liberals full control last year, only for that control to be rebuilt after the election through defections, timing, and parliamentary math? Because that's exactly what this is starting to look like. And if the next few days go Carney's way, Canada could wake up to one of the biggest political power shifts in modern parliamentary history. And this is not some niche Ottawa story that only political junkies care about. This matters because once a minority government starts behaving like a majority, everything changes, the pace changes, the pressure changes, the opposition loses leverage, budgets move differently, economic policy moves differently, trade fights move differently. And if you're a regular Canadian dealing with prices, housing, jobs, taxes, or uncertainty coming from the United States, then who controls Parliament suddenly becomes very personal, very fast. Here's the simple version. Conservative MP Marilyn Gladu crossed the floor and joined Mark Carney's Liberals that pushed the Liberals to 171 seats in the House of Commons, putting them just one seat short of the 172 usually needed for a majority. On paper, that sounds technical. In reality, it's explosive. Because Carney already had by-elections coming up, and those elections now look less like routine local contests and more like the final pieces in a national power play. And the timing is what makes this so striking. 3 by-elections are set for April 13th, Scarborough Southwest, University Rosedale, and Terrebonne. 2 of those seats are in Liberal-friendly territory around Toronto. So when Gladu made the jump, she didn't just help the government, she moved it right to the edge of a breakthrough. That voters themselves did not hand Carney outright in the last general election. That's why critics are so furious. To them, this doesn't feel like politics unfolding naturally. It feels like the result is being rewritten after the fact. But here's where the story gets even more interesting. People keep repeating that 172 is the magic number. Technically, yes, but in practical terms, 173 matters more. Why? Because the Speaker is supposed to be impartial. If the House ends in a tie, the Speaker votes in a way that usually preserves the status quo rather than simply acting like another government vote. So a 172-seat majority can still be awkward. It can still be fragile. It can still leave the government exposed. But 173? That gives the Liberals something much more useful, a majority they can actually operate with. And once you understand that, the whole thing starts to look less like a random series of events and more like a carefully opening door. One defection might be dismissed as personal frustration to get attention, but this is now 5 MPs joining Carney's Liberals in a matter of months, 4 of them from the Conservatives. That's not normal pace, that's not normal pressure, that's not normal political weather. And it's exactly why people are using phrases like power grab, because this isn't just about one politician switching teams, it's about a government building strength fast enough to change the balance of Parliament itself. Now on the surface, the explanation sounds noble. Gladu said Canada needs serious leadership in a moment of American tariffs and pressure on Canadian sovereignty. Other MPs who crossed before her used similar language: unity, stability, strength, seriousness, national resilience, and to be fair, that argument does connect with the mood of the moment. Canada is dealing with trade tension, sovereignty rhetoric, and the wider fear that the country needs a government strong enough to respond quickly if relations with Washington get rougher. But let's be honest. High-minded language is only part of the story. The other part is political gravity. Mark Carney replaced Justin Trudeau, shifted the Liberals toward the center, won the election, and has kept projecting calm competence while Pierre Poilievre has been trying to recover from a brutal loss when one leader looks steady and the other looks boxed in. Politicians start making survival calculations. They may talk about principle, and maybe some of them mean it. But they also know where momentum lives, and right now momentum is sitting in Carney's office. That creates a vicious cycle for the Conservatives. Every defection makes Carney look stronger, every defection makes Poilievre look weaker, and every new sign of weakness encourages more whispers about who might cross next. At that point, it stops being a story about policy differences and starts becoming a story about power itself. If you're an MP watching the government move closer to a durable majority, do you stay in the opposition and hope things turn around? Or do you move toward the center of decision-making while the door is still open? And this is where the moral problem gets a lot sharper. Because yes, floor crossing is legal in Canada, it has happened before, it's part of parliamentary history, but most people don't experience it as some neutral constitutional feature. They experience it emotionally, they vote for one banner and then watch that seat help another. Banner after the election, that's when trust starts breaking down. It may be allowed, it may be defended, it may even be strategic, but for a lot of voters, it still feels like a bait and switch. That discomfort gets even stronger because Poilievre is hammering exactly that point. He says Carney is trying to seize a majority voters denied him. He says these are backroom deals, and he also pointed to the fact that Gladu herself had previously argued floor crossers should face voters in a by-election. That part matters because it turns this from a procedural argument into a credibility argument. If crossing the floor is principled, then why not test that principle with the voters immediately? Now, supporters of Carney would answer that by saying this is simply how parliamentary democracy works. MPs are not robots. They are elected representatives. They can change their minds, respond to national circumstances, or decide their constituents are better served somewhere else. That's the formal defense, and in a narrow legal sense, it's true. Nobody is breaking the rules here. Nobody is canceling elections. Nobody is overthrowing the system. But politics is not just about what is legal. It is also about what feels legitimate, and that is exactly where this fight is heading. Because once a government starts accumulating power after the voters have spoken, people naturally begin asking whether the spirit of the election is being respected. That question becomes even louder when the pace is this unusual. Canada has seen floor crossing before, yes, but the speed of these defections and the possibility that they directly help create majority status is what makes this moment stand out. It doesn't feel routine. It feels engineered by momentum, opportunity, and weakness on the other side. So what changes if Carney gets over the line? First, the tempo of government changes overnight. Minority governments have to negotiate constantly. They have to win support issue by issue. They have to compromise more openly. A majority government still faces limits, of course, but it doesn't wake up every day wondering whether the opposition can stall its survival. That difference is massive. A minority asks permission more often. A majority sets the schedule. And that matters in real-world terms. If Carney wants to move quickly on trade responses, he gets more room. If he wants aggressive industrial policy framed around Canadian independence and resilience, he gets more room. If he wants to sell the public on a stronger federal role in managing economic disruption, he gets more room. For his supporters, that is the whole point. They look at the uncertainty coming from the U.S. and say Canada cannot afford gridlock. They want decisiveness. They want a government that can actually move. But this is exactly where supporters and critics start talking past each other. Supporters say this is necessary strength. Critics say this is concentrated power. Supporters say the moment demands unity. Critics say unity is being used as a cover for absorbing the opposition piece by piece. Supporters say Carney is assembling a national coalition. Critics hear that and think, no, he's assembling a majority he didn't win honestly at the ballot box. Same facts. Completely different emotional conclusion. And don't assume a majority solves everything instantly, because it doesn't. Parliamentary committees can still cause headaches. Procedural hurdles can still slow legislation. Internal tensions can still exist inside a broad coalition. In fact, the bigger the tent gets, the harder it can become to pretend everybody inside it agrees on the same long-term direction. So even if Carney reaches majority territory, that doesn't mean absolute freedom. It just means the Liberals gain far more control over the main battlefield. That's also why rumors started flying that Carney might prorogue Parliament if he got the numbers. In simple terms, that would mean ending the current session and resetting the board. Carney strongly denied it. He said the idea had never even entered his thinking, but the fact that the rumor gained traction at all tells you something important. People are already anxious about how much power the Liberals might wield if this majority comes together. Once those kinds of suspicions start circulating, it means the trust level in the system is already under stress. And then there's Pierre Poilievre, because this story is not just about Carney getting stronger, it's also about whether Poilievre is losing control of his own side. 1, defection is manageable. 2 is dangerous, for Conservatives crossing over in a matter of months. That becomes a leadership story whether he likes it or not. Can he hold the caucus together? Can he stop the sense of drift? Can he convince voters that these MPs are opportunists rather than evidence that his party is cracking under pressure? Because here's the uncomfortable truth for the Conservatives. Every MP who leaves doesn't just damage their numbers, it damages the perception of confidence. Politics runs on perception as much as arithmetic. If the public starts seeing Carney as the adult everyone eventually migrates toward, that becomes a powerful image. It tells voters that even some of his opponents think he's the safer option in a volatile moment. And if that image hardens, it becomes much harder for Poilievre to reframe the story on his own terms. So what happens next? Scenario 1. The Liberals win at least 2 of the 3 by-elections. If that happens, Carney likely reaches 173 seats or more, which gives him a much more functional majority and makes this entire power shift feel real, not theoretical. That would be the nightmare outcome for his critics, because at that point the government can say the numbers are the numbers, the rules are the rules, and the House has spoken. Scenario 2. The Liberals only reach 172. That still gives Carney a headline victory, but it's a thinner one. The Speaker becomes more important. 'Tis become more dangerous. The opposition still has openings. Carney would look stronger, yes, but not invincible. It would be power with an asterisk. Scenario 3. Something slips. Maybe Terrebonne goes the wrong way. Maybe one so-called safe seat becomes unexpectedly competitive. Maybe the momentum stalls. Then suddenly the entire mood changes. The story stops being unstoppable takeover and becomes political high-wire act. Same prime minister, same government, totally different. Level of confidence. And there's one more possibility that may matter most in the long run. Backlash, floor crossing can be legal and still feel wrong to voters. It can work in the short term and damage trust in the long term. If enough Canadians decide this whole process looks too clever, too managed, too detached from the spirit of the election, then Carney could win the numbers battle and still plant the seeds of a deeper resentment that comes back later. That is why this moment feels so much bigger than one politician changing seats in the House. This is really about a much larger question. Can a government that fell short of majority use defections, timing, and by-elections to build one anyway, and still claim the full democratic legitimacy that comes with it? Supporters will say yes, critics will say absolutely not, but nobody can pretend it's a small question, because the answer could shape Canadian politics for years. And maybe that's the real tension here, not whether the Liberals can count to 172 or 173, not whether one more MP crosses over, not even whether the next by-elections go Carney's way. The real tension is whether Canadians look at this and see strong leadership in a dangerous time, or a political class showing how power can be expanded after voters thought they had already made the call. So watch what happens next, because the next few moves may decide far more than a seat count. They may decide whether this becomes the story of a government stepping up in a national moment, or the story of how a denied majority was quietly rebuilt anyway. And if the second version is the one that sticks, then this fight is only getting started. If you're watching Canada right now, don't just watch the wins and losses, watch how the public reacts to the way those wins are being built. Because that reaction may end up mattering even more than the numbers themselves.